Ora, então, boas tardes. Vamos iniciar aqui a habitual rubrica de domingo, o GamingGeek Talk, hoje na versão 72. Portanto, temos conversado já durante muitas semanas. Hoje é mais cedo. Se calhar esta rubrica vai passar a ser realmente mais ou menos a esta hora, para não coincidir com a parte da noite, que em princípio já estou um bocadito mais fraco. E se calhar agora durante a tarde é melhor, fica o assunto resolvido e, e assim está melhor. Estava aqui só a ver se está tudo. Está tudo em princípio. Está. Podemos fechar aqui este browserzinho. Vamos abrir o outro e vamos então dar aqui início. Ora bem, vamos então iniciar aqui com aqui o site no YouTube. Já tem o meu canal, fica aqui tudo gravado. Vamos fazer refresh. Possivelmente vai aparecer aqui. Então, estamos em direto, como vêem. Fica tudo gravado aqui no canal do YouTube. Todos os vídeos estão aqui. Portanto, sempre que queiram ir buscar alguma coisa que perderam, que não deve ser grande coisa, não é? Mas pronto. O que é que eu queria ressalvar aqui esta semana no canal? É as listas de reprodução. Como o nome indica, são listas que se reproduzem. Temos umas piadas do caralho. Ora bem, eu tentei colocar isto por temas, por da Warships, as conversas ficam sempre todas aqui, ou aquelas que eu já tive ao trabalho de descoordenar. Depois o World of Tanks vem para aqui, o Call of Duty vai estar aqui, juntamente com o Black Ops, e Modern Warfare, e Warzone, está tudo aqui. Bom, estava com ideias de separar, mas deixa estar assim. O universo Call of Duty está aqui. O WarThunder está aqui, o Hyperscape era para ir ali, e depois vem aquilo que eu mais queria mostrar, que é otimizar gráficos, otimizar Windows, e eu supostamente acho que tinha uma outra, ou ainda vai ser criada uma outra. É isso. Mas basicamente isto aqui, porque esta semana tenho focado muito aqui em alguns problemas com o jogo e com os gráficos, e é isso que há muita gente com PC que realmente tem os computadores, apesar de terem bons computadores, têm os computadores um bocadito mal otimizados. Então, na parte dos gráficos, então hoje vamos tratar aqui, vamos pôr aqui, está aqui os vídeos que eu já fiz, né? Tendo em última atenção é este que está aqui, que é o Fixo Warzone VRAM, que ao mesmo tempo aborda o problema do Warzone, dos gráficos, e também mostra como é que funcionam e explica. Este, por exemplo, abordei nele, que é o Nvidia, isto para quem tem gráficos da Nvidia. O próximo vídeo que está a ser feito agora vai ser o MSI Afterburner, e juntamente com o WarThunder, portanto vai ser o próximo vídeo lançado, talvez esta semana que vai entrar. Já estou a ver que vai ser difícil, porque vai ser o lançamento em termos das performances das novas gráficas da Ampere, da Nvidia, da série 3000, e eu vou ter que andar a pesquisar muito, porque eu preciso de comprar uma gráfica dessas. Pode não ser agora no lançamento, porque acho que vai haver muita gente completamente apanhada do capacete. Mas eu tenho que estudar muito bem, porque todos os meus investimentos aqui no PC são sempre feitos à lupa. Quando o dinheiro não abunda, e quando a gente tem que poupar durante muitos meses para comprar uma simples peça, é triste, mas por outros vídeos dá um certo gosto, certo? A gente valoriza muito isso. Eu aqui no vídeo mostro várias variantes e programas que depois explico em concreto. Portanto, muito bom vocês seguirem isso aqui se puderem, porque deu trabalho. Eu deixo também de jogar para poder vir aqui, não é? Portanto, depois se puderem fazer subscreverem, não pagam nada, pôr aqui o chininho, como diz o Nando Moura do Brasil, porque assim sempre quando eu estou live vocês têm essa informação e podem depois ver os vídeos. Não, otimizar o Windows também é muito interessante. Tem aqui algumas das. Este aqui até está no sítio errado. Tenho que ver porque é que ele está aqui. Antes que me esqueça. Não há problema nenhum. Justamente tem que ver. Tem aqui várias opções do próprio. Desde que foi o lançamento da versão Windows 2004, as várias patches. Depois também foi a análise do próprio Windows. Há muita gente que ainda está na versão anterior, por isso é que é sempre bom vir aqui. Tem também aqui um bug muito pertinente que já foi corrigido, mas é preciso ter nessa versão. Tem também aqui a conversa sobre a ativação da GPU Boost ou GPU Shadowing, que é mais uma opção nova do Windows. Portanto, sempre bom verem isto aqui que está aqui. Eu até vou abrir isto aqui, que é para depois não me esquecer de vir cá ver. Parar ali. Portanto, vejam bem estas listas de reprodução, são muito interessantes. E acho que para muita gente tem aqui o trabalhinho todo feito, portanto é só seguirem. E depois qualquer dúvida, coloquem no próprio vídeo, que eu, assim que possível, responderei. Se não, apanhem-me numa live e perguntem, olha, no vídeo e tal, falei isto, surgiu-me este problema, que é para eu conseguir analisar e ver o que é que vocês pretendem. Ora bem, então, seguindo para o World of Tanks, que é o jogo sempre com mais atividade. Desta vez até não é o mais, porque eu já cobri a maior parte do que está aqui na semana passada. Então, temos a decorrer aqui, hoje começa às 4 da tarde, a hora CST, combate entre os Fame e os Mercy. Deixa lá ver se eles já estão. Provavelmente não. Depois há aquela diferença de. Não. Ainda não começou. Portanto, começa às 14. Desculpem, às 16 hora CST. Que deve ser mais 2, não é? Portanto, às 6 da tarde, talvez. Portanto, se quiserem ver plans de topo, façam o favor de seguir aqui. Nós vamos seguir para a frente. Battle Pass Season 3. Vamos por aqui o vídeo. Eu prefiro pôr antes o vídeo.
Greetings, Commanders. I'm launching Season 3 of Battle Pass. But first, you need to be briefed. The challenge will start on September 17th, and it will last for almost 3 months. The main progression consists of 45 stages. Play in vehicles Tier 6 and higher in all types of random battles, excluding grand battles, to earn points and receive rewards. Points are awarded for your impact on the battle. Work as a team and use the new communication system to improve your performance and increase your chances of victory. If you win, you'll receive 7 points for being among the top 3 players on your team by experience earned, and 5 points for being among the top 10. If you lose or draw, you'll receive 5 points for being among the top 3 and 3 points for being among the top 10. Players who are in spots 11 to 15 on either team will neither receive nor lose any points.
Uma ressalva aqui nesta maneira. Acho bastante justo isto. Que a mesma equipa que perca receba pontos. A questão é esta. É que a diferença dos pontos não é muito grande. E isso é que não está bem. Porque a maior parte daquela malta que usa o sistema de bots fica logo a pensar, quer ganhe, quer perca, eu vou sempre receber pontinhos. Então vai haver bots aos pontapés. Certo? Portanto, pode haver gajos aqui a apanhar 3 pontos numa derrota sendo bots do que um jogador que jogou ativamente aqui. Certo? Isto aqui devia ser pelo menos 1 ponto aqui, ou 3 pontos aqui, 2 pontos aqui. Quando muito. Ou então aqui só até nível 5, por exemplo. 5 pontos. Porque isso assim dá muita vontade de jogar combate. Porque estando nos 10 primeiros vais receber sempre pontos, quer ganhes, quer percas.
Nor lose any points. New core vehicles will be available for this season of Battle Pass. The IS-4 and the T-110E5. The IS-4 earns an additional point if you are among the top 10. And the T-110E5 earns 3 additional points if you're among the top 3 on your team by experience earned, regardless of the battle outcome. You'll need to play in several vehicles to complete the entire season. Each vehicle has a point limit. The higher the vehicle tier, the greater the limit. This is a great opportunity to research new vehicles and try out new gameplay styles. Once you earn the maximum number of points in a certain vehicle, you'll receive additional points on top. Battle Pass consists of the main progression and the elite progression. The main progression has 45 stages. Earn 50 points to complete a stage. For completing each stage, you'll earn base rewards, days of World of Tanks premium account, credits, standard and bounty equipment, demounting kits, training booklets, personal reserves and blueprint fragments. In addition to these rewards, you can also get improved rewards, personal training manuals, training guides, and personal reserves for credits. To gain access to these rewards, you'll need to purchase the Improved Pass. Even if you purchase the Improved Pass after you've completed several stages, you'll immediately receive the rewards for all stages you've completed. If you are a new World of Tanks player and you don't have enough vehicles to complete the first 10 stages, you'll be able to rent 3 Tier 7 premium vehicles for free. Use them to earn the remaining points. After that, the Improved Pass will be available for purchase. In Season 3, you'll be able to choose the equipment you receive as a reward. You can do this via the Battle Pass progression menu. Bounty equipment, like before, will grant a bigger bonus to characteristics once it's upgraded. Bounty rotation mechanism, which doesn't have an improved equipment counterpart, is one of the options. At certain stages, you'll be able to choose a new standard equipment item. This will allow you to adjust your vehicles and improve their key characteristics to fit a certain role. Rewards also include customization elements, such as emblems, decals, and 2D styles. When you complete all 45 stages, you'll receive a medal and the main reward. One of 2 3D styles, Newt for the IS-4, or Condor for the T-110E5. You'll also be able to recruit one of 2 new crew members, Nikolai Samorkin or Jack Reed. They both have the Brothers-in-Arms perk, trained to 100% and enough experience to train 2 additional skills or perks. Each crew member comes with a style. When you choose a crew member, you'll get the style for their tank. If you have the improved pass, you'll receive the other style as well. But one way or another, you can recruit only one crew member. By choosing a crew member and the 3D style for their vehicle, you join either Team IS-4 or Team T-110E5. Once Season 3 is over, the team that has more players will be provided a mission for ×2 combat experience, and it can be completed multiple times, using Tier 4 to 10 vehicles. The runner-up will receive a mission for ×2 crew experience, and it can be completed multiple times. Want to receive all the rewards faster? If you have the improved pass, you can purchase main progression stages. During the first 2 months of the season, you will be able to purchase a bundle of 20 stages. And during the last month, you can purchase any number of stages. After completing the main progression, you will proceed to the Elite progression of Battle Pass. You will be able to earn bonds. The more stages you complete, the higher the reward. One more thing. Your progress will not go unnoticed. When you complete the first Elite progression stage of Season 3, you'll receive a special dynamic badge. It should be applied manually. The badge will show your current Elite progression stage during the whole season. The badge will disappear at the end of the season. But you will still have special decals that show your mastery level. They will be awarded to you for completing certain stages of the Elite progression. Good luck on the battlefield.
Assim, o que eu posso dizer sobre este evento é interessante, não é? Isto foi copiado de outros jogos que já existem com Battle Pass, só que a Wargaming conseguiu trazer isto e implementar isto à maneira deles, que é lucrar. Que é estas coisas que um gajo tem que comprar. Percebe? 5.000 de gold. Estão a ver quanto é que é? 5.000 de gold são 20 euros. Estão a perceber o truque? Desculpem, são 10 euros. 4.900 de gold. São 9 euros e pico. Portanto, são 10 euros. À volta de 10 euros. Para mim, eu sou contra isso. Porque, por exemplo, no Warzone, no Battle Pass, tirando a primeira vez que o compras, todas as outras vezes pode ficar completamente gratuito, já que durante a evolução do Battle Pass vais desbloqueando as moedinhas, portanto, as coins, e chegando ao fim tens o valor e até te sobra sempre 200 ou 300 coins para comprares o Battle Pass seguinte. Aqui não. É só um detalhe, não é? Só um detalhe. Mas outra coisa em favor da Wargaming, acho que o nível de gráficos está cada vez melhor, o nível de apresentação também. Tomara, eu já disse isso várias vezes, que eles implementassem esse nível de dedicação na correção do que continua a ser grande calcanhar daqueles do jogo, que é o matchmaker e tudo associado ao mesmo. Mas para os barcos está muito calmo, porque o evento que chegou já está a decorrer. Agora vamos aqui. Temos o King of the Sea, que é este fim de semana, não é? Começa hoje, dia 13, e vai até 8 de novembro. Portanto, se jogam, aproveitem. Não é? E para aqui para ver os replays. Portanto, já sabem, só escolher o que querem ver. E vão-se maravilhar. Enfim, seguindo. Temos também os Combat Missions. Tem a campanha que também está a decorrer. Eu já desbloqueei isto, não é? Portanto, já sabem que no nível 10 nos barcos, independentemente de qual fosse a classe e a nacionalidade, tinha um super contentor. Tier 9 tinham 2 contentores. Tier 8 um contentor. E depois, entre o nível 5 e nível 7, são 2 camuflagens comemorativas. Aproveitem. Principalmente isto que está aqui. Olha, este aqui deu-me dias prémio e outras coisas engraçadas. Mas o principal foi os dias prémio. Foram 21 dias de conta prémio e foram 30 mil de colo. Tendo em atenção que faltavam-me 4 barcos tier 10, porque eu troquei por causa do evento que existe no Warships, fazer reset às linhas, e faltava. Mas pronto. Temos aqui também o Marathon Gift. Eu vou pôr o vídeo da nossa amiga Deixe.
Great pleasure to welcome you to the world's first naval cinema. Moor your ships because the next episode of the Naval Legends Marathon is getting started. We have enough tickets for the show for everybody. So be sure to invite your friends and share this video across your social networks. This is the second episode of the marathon, but let me remind you of what to expect so you don't miss anything. We take some parts from the announcement. Stay on the lookout for bonus codes that will appear in each episode of the historical marathon. As with the in-game daily shipments, all gifts are revealed in advance. Each bonus code will also provide you access to a combat mission chain. Complete all the chains to get 4 containers of the new 5 Epochs of the Navy collection and 1 million credits. Want even more gifts? If we manage to get the indicated number of new subscribers by the time each video is published, the credits will be replaced with coal. If we get the indicated number of subscribers for every episode, the combat missions will bring you a total of 10,000 coal. You can learn more about it on our website. The link is in the description. The new episode of the marathon is dedicated to our in-game ship types. The World of Warships Armada includes more than 350 ships from the first half of the 20th century. Players have been fighting with fast and maneuverable destroyers, controlling the seas with powerful battleships, battling with cruisers, and launching squadrons from the decks of aircraft carriers for 5 years already. We'll start today's show with battleships. These ships stand out for their strong armor and powerful main battery guns. Discover the history behind the last remaining pre-dreadnought battleship, Mikasa.
They were designed to be the best. They met enemies face to face, endured tragedies and enjoyed victories. They went down in history due to the bravery of their crews. They are the ships that deserve to be called naval legends. In this episode, Battleship Mikasa, the flagship of the legendary Admiral Togo Heihachiro. There is often a mystical connection between a ship and those who serve on it. A perfect example of this is the story of Admiral Togo Heihachiro and his battleship Mikasa. In the late 19th century, Japan launched an ambitious shipbuilding program that intended to put 111 warships into service over a period of 10 years. The new ships were meant to be the best in the world and remain up to date despite the rapid development of naval engineering. Mikasa became the last of 4 Japanese battleships built under that program.
Battleship Mikasa was built at the Vickers Shipyard, England, starting from 1899 until 1902 at the cost of 15 million yen. This was equal to 6% of the Japanese government budget, which was 260 million yen. It was a very expensive project for the country at the time.
The Japanese government leaders acknowledged that the further development of the country was only possible through the adoption of advanced foreign technologies. In the late 19th century, the leading naval power in the world was Great Britain. Therefore, it is hardly worth mentioning that the Japanese Navy was based on the British traditions and technologies.
England provided Japan with a superb battleship equipped with state-of-the-art weaponry, engines, and hull. The English people wondered, why are we building such an advanced ship for Japan? It is way more advanced than any of our ships. But Englishmen used the experience they gained during the construction and built their next ship, which was even more advanced and considerably less expensive than battleship Mikasa. However, at the time of its construction, Mikasa was the most powerful ship in the world, even more powerful than British warships.
The new battleship was worth its price tag. She was one of the most advanced warships in not only Japan, but the whole world. Total displacement, 15,979 tons. The second among all battleships in the world at that time. Length, over 130 meters. Beam, about 23 meters. Draft, almost 8 meters. Armament. The primary armament of Mikasa complied with the applicable standards of that time. 2 twin barbette-mounted Mark IX guns by the Armstrong Company. Caliber, 305 millimeters. Medium caliber, 14 QF Ellswick Ordnance Company guns. Caliber, 152 millimeters. 10 of these guns arranged in the common battery along the side gave Mikasa a great advantage in battle. Secondary armament, 20 Ellswick Patton N guns. Caliber 76 millimeters. Small caliber artillery, 12 Hotchkiss guns. Caliber 47 millimeters. Torpedo tubes, 4 submerged beam torpedo tubes. Armor has an English design. It is compact in size and reliable in protecting vital parts of the ship. Main belt 102 to 229 millimeters. Upper belt 152 millimeters. Main turrets, 203 to 254 millimeters. Conning tower, 356 millimeters. The mechanical equipment also met the highest standards of that time. Power plant, 2 Vickers engines and 25 Belleville water tube boilers. Power, 16,000 horsepower. Maximum speed, 18 knots. Cruising range, about 4,000 nautical miles at a speed of 10 knots.
Mikasa greatly influenced both the further development of Japanese naval artillery and tactics in sea battles. Back in those times, there was a popular opinion that a huge ship equipped with powerful guns guaranteed an easy victory.
This is the main battery of battleship Mikasa. Each shell weighed 400 kilograms. The effective range amounted to over 10 kilometers. This shell on the right is a high explosive shell. This one on the left is an armor-piercing shell. During the Russo-Japanese War, high explosive shells were used more often by our ships. This is the gun room number 4. Here, you can see a 152 millimeter gun. The gun slit was open in the beginning of a battle. 10 sailors operated the gun. These wheels were used to tilt the gun up or down.
In December 1903, Togo Heihachiro was appointed to command the combined fleet of the Imperial Japanese Navy, which was established that year. He formed 3 squadrons and took the lead of the first squadron, choosing Mikasa as his flagship. He established his headquarters on the ship, which became his home for 2 years.
This is where Admiral Togo Heihachiro ate. This is the ship mess. The decorations were also like this when Mikasa was the flagship. Next to the mess, there is the Admiral's private cabin. This spacious room was for meetings held by the officers of the ship. Admiral Togo Heihachiro sat at the head of the table, surrounded by his officers. They ate and discussed plans in this room.
Togo Heihachiro traveled a long and difficult path to become the head of the most powerful battleship of that time.
In the Imperial Japanese Navy, he started from the very bottom of the career ladder and rapidly moved up the ranks while constantly participating in sea battles. He felt the spirit of war with every fiber of his being.
The future admiral of the Japanese fleet studied maths at Cambridge, attended the Royal Naval Academy in Portsmouth and Royal Naval College in Greenwich. During his stay in Britain, he understood what had helped this country maintain its status as Queen of the Seas through naval knowledge, centuries of battle experience, and advanced shipbuilding technologies.
This is the only part of Mikasa where you can see the ship's original deck made of teak. During the battle, they would place a hoist system here to lift shells to the upper decks. This deck is about 110 years old, but is still in good condition. Teak is a very hard type of wood, and it doesn't rot, as you can see. This is the wheelhouse. Various equipment for steering the ship was mounted here. These systems were used to control the propulsion system, speeding up or slowing down its two shafts. Some of this equipment is from another ship, built by the same shipyard, but it's all identical to the systems that were installed on Mikasa. This is the steering wheel. The inscriptions on it are in English because Mikasa was built in England.
日本海軍は英国のスタンダードであると大きさとか高さ
British standards, height, size, and arrangement of guns were very different from those used in Japan. So Japanese sailors were forced to eat beef and drink milk to become taller and stronger. However, many members of the crew couldn't eat animal products due to their religion. When the Navy began to insist that they eat meat and drink milk to become strong, the sailors refused to do that. They confined themselves to the lower deck and declared that they would not come out. The sailors were removed and spent the next 4 years in prison, and Mikasa's crew was almost completely renewed.
That way, resolutely breaking its age-old naval traditions, Japan was building a new navy. With Spartan conditions and Japanese discipline, the nation was building the fighting spirit of its sailors.
This weapon was operated by about 10 men. In those times, every sailor assigned to the gun would train, eat, and even rest here. The ones on duty would sleep in these hammocks.
All these efforts were not in vain. By the beginning of the Russo-Japanese War, the Imperial Japanese Navy had become a formidable power. The warrior spirit and good fortune became the decisive factors for Vice Admiral Togo and his flagship during the Russo-Japanese War. Since its beginning, Mikasa was the primary target for the Imperial Russian Navy. The Battle of the Yellow Sea, the Battle of Tsushima. Each time, the Admiral's battleship was showered with a hail of shells, but each time, Mikasa managed to survive with honor. Multiple sailors and officers lost their lives, but Mikasa was still proudly carrying the flag. A lucky star was guiding the Japanese commander-in-chief and his flagship through all the battles to victory.
Starting with the very first battles, Mikasa was losing officers and sailors to Russian shells. Admiral Togo stood on the open bridge instead of the protected conning tower. Why did he do that? Well, firstly, he didn't have experience from major naval battles. Secondly, from the open bridge, he could see the ships better. Ready to fall in battle, Togo was observing the situation and giving commands, and he only received light wounds in his early engagements. The Battle of the Yellow Sea was a major engagement of the Russo-Japanese War. The Russian squadron, commanded by Rear Admiral Wittgeft, was trying to break through to Vladivostok. Just like Admiral Togo, Wittgeft preferred to stay on the open bridge. And the very first shell that hit the bridge was fatal for him.
In the Battle of Tsushima, Mikasa also sustained more hits than any other Japanese ship. Despite this, Admiral Togo and his officers remained on the bridge and never stepped away from it. And he survived.
The Battle of Tsushima became a triumph for the Japanese Navy and its commander-in-chief. 3 months later, on September 5, the Russo-Japanese War concluded with a peace treaty. The Imperial Japanese Navy was getting ready to celebrate the victory with a grand naval parade in Tokyo Bay, so Admiral Togo and his staff left the ship to report to the Emperor and took all his luck with him. Mikasa never made it to the parade.
Just a month after the commander's flag was taken down on Mikasa, the battleship suffered a disaster. On September 11, 1905, a fire started in her magazines and caused an explosion. It took the lives of 250 men, with over 300 injured. The explosion created a huge breach in her hull. Mikasa immediately began to take on water, and she sank on even keel to the bottom of the Sasebo Bay.
The battleship's brilliant career came to an end. The Japanese managed to lift and repair Mikasa, but the ship never managed to regain her glory. In 1925, the battleship was taken to a custom-made dock in Yokosuka, where she was covered with earth and concrete up to the waterline. The legendary ship became a museum.
The museum's opening ceremony was attended by Admiral Togo, who passed away in 1934. Admiral Togo became a Japanese national hero. He received all of the highest merits possible: orders, awards, honor, and glory. And he was put in charge of the education of Hirohito, the heir apparent to the emperor's throne.
After World War II, Mikasa was in ruin. All the guns and most of the systems were dismantled. There were proposals to sell the battleship as scrap metal, but this didn't happen. Then the American military arranged a dance hall on the gun deck. When some young Britons once saw this, they wrote to Japan Times, "What is wrong with this country? Well, England has preserved HMS Victory. Why can't the Japanese do this for their ship?" The letter gathered a wide public response in Japan, and a movement began to restore Mikasa and reopen it as a museum.
In order to restore the ship's historic image, most of her elements had to be recreated anew. Today, the exposition on board Mikasa is dedicated to Japan's victory in the Battle of Tsushima and to Admiral Togo Heihachiro. They are together again, the Admiral and his flagship.
Cruisers are versatile fighters. They have decent firepower, as well as good speed and maneuverability characteristics. These are the ships that players deploy when starting out in the game. The most advanced light cruisers of the Royal Navy were the Belfast-class cruisers. We'll talk about them next.
Muito bom esta primeira parte.
They were designed to be the best. They met enemies face to face, endured tragedies and enjoyed victories. They went down in history due to the bravery of their crews. They are the ships that deserve to be called naval legends.
In this episode, Cruiser Belfast, the keeper of the Royal Navy's grandeur. In the beginning of the 1930s, the British Admiralty learned that Japan had begun construction on the new Mogami-class light cruisers, which surpassed the British ships of the same type. In London, it was perceived as a challenge and required an appropriate response. However, to create a worthy adversary for Mogami, the British had to approach the limits imposed by international treaties.
Mogami is quite a successful attempt from the Japanese to create something of their own. They managed to do it. However, the cruiser Mogami encouraged other naval powers to break the provisions of the Washington Naval Treaty.
In 1934, British shipyards started the construction of light cruisers, later named the Town class, because all the ships were named after British towns. The further improvement of the project led to the appearance of the two most advanced ships in the class, Belfast and Edinburgh. In comparison with other towns, they had better armament and a more rational armour layout. By many parameters, the British cruisers were on a par with foreign ships of the same type, despite the fact that they were inferior to their main rival, Mogami, in the number of primary armament guns, 12 against 15. The British tried to even the score by developing new artillery systems for main batteries.
They tried to install a 4-gun turret on Belfast and Edinburgh, but the early trials showed that it became very tight. What does this mean? The turret was overcrowded, making the ammunition handling and firing too inconvenient. That's why they gave up on the idea very quickly.
As a result, engineers settled for triple turrets that had a distinctive feature. To prevent the powder gases from affecting the shell's trajectory when all barrels fired simultaneously, the middle gun was moved backwards a little. The Belfast's firepower was reinforced with 6 coaxial dual-purpose artillery mounts, with a caliber of 4 inches. In general, the cruiser was well armed, and her bountiful artillery made up a good part of her displacement. Cruiser Belfast was commissioned on the eve of war on August 3, 1939. But 4 months later, she had to return to dock.
With the outbreak of World War II, Great Britain faced 2 parallel tasks. One of them was habitual, and the British were prepared for it. The second task was uncharacteristic and unusual. Let's start with the latter. It was the underwater war. The British weren't ready for it at all.
German U-boats were causing lots of trouble, but the British were able to sink them. However, the Royal Navy ships faced another enemy, mines. Belfast fell prey to the most dangerous of them, a new German bottom mine.
In 1939, when a mine exploded underneath this engine room, it pushed everything up to such an extent that they had to rebuild almost the entire ship.
Belfast hit the mine, she not only received a hole in the hull, but she also had her keel broken, and that's a place that is almost impossible to repair. It's a miracle that she remained afloat, and it's a miracle that she could return to her base for repairs.
Over the course of the modernization, Belfast was equipped with modern radar systems, an upgraded gunfire control system, and became almost a meter wider to increase her stability. The specifications of cruiser Belfast after the modernization of 1942. Length, 613 feet 6 inches. Beam, 66 feet 3 inches. Draft, 23 feet 4 inches. Total displacement, 14,900 tons. The power plant included 4 turbo gear Parsons turbines and 4 Admiralty boilers, and produced 80,000 horsepower. The cruiser's maximum speed reached 31 knots after the modernization. Armor. Main belt, 4.5 inches. Decks, from 2 to 3 inches. Athwartship bulkheads, 2.5 inches. Primary armament turrets were protected by armor from 2 to 4 inches thick. Armament. Primary armament. 12 6-inch Mark 23 guns in 4 turrets. Long-range anti-aircraft artillery. 12 Mark 16 cannons in coaxial mounts, caliber 4 inches. Small caliber anti-aircraft artillery. 2 Vickers Mark 6A 8-barrel pom-pom guns, caliber 1.6 inches. 4 single-barrel and 5 coaxial Oerlikon mounts. The cruiser carried 2 triple TR-4 torpedo launchers with a caliber of 21 inches. 3 Supermarine Walrus aircraft were on board to carry out reconnaissance and fire adjustment. Cruising range, 12,200 miles at 12 knots. During the repairs, the Belfast's damaged power plant was completely replaced. It was the same as on the other town-class cruisers. The difference was in its location on the ship and the power produced. According to the project, the nominal output of the power plant was 82,500 horsepower, but the calculations showed that the Belfast's machine power should be decreased to 80,000 horsepower to work more efficiently.
These steam turbines are driven by the superheated steam that is generated in the boilers at 390 degrees centigrade and at 20 atmospheres. This produces enough power to drive the ship weighing 14,000 tons through the water at 32 knots, which is about 36 miles an hour or 58 kilometers an hour.
Understanding the threat posed by German U-boats, the British Navy was constantly hunting for them. To oppose enemy submarines, Belfast was equipped with a hydroacoustic system, a load of depth charges, and aircraft. 3 Walrus seaplanes were able to fight submarines, apart from reconnaissance and fire adjustment tasks. They could carry 2 normal or anti-submarine depth charges on each of their wing bomb racks.
And it was designed to be catapulted from between the funnels into the air and then go off and do its tasks. Its tasks were primarily reconnaissance and anti-submarine warfare, but it was discovered very early on that actually the aircraft was very useful as a search and rescue aircraft. Now, once the aircraft had actually finished its sortie, it had to be recovered back on board the ship. And one of the ways in which you could try and ensure that the water wasn't too rough for it to land on was for the ship to do an S manoeuvre, which left a sort of hemisphere of smooth water onto which the aircraft could land. Once it landed, the aircraft then had to taxi up alongside the ship and then be recovered. Clearly, the pilot could not stop the engine until the Segue-me gunner had actually hooked the jib from the crane, or the hook from the crane, onto the aircraft. So if you can imagine, he was sitting up on top of here with the crane hook coming down towards him in a very rough sea, waiting to hook it on with that propeller going round behind him. A very dangerous job. Once it was hooked on, the engine could be switched off and then the aircraft could be craned on board.
Impressionante.
To do it as quickly as possible before the slick that they had created had actually dissipated and the water began to get rough again.
A warship is a complex system, where the main function of its elements, even the tiniest one, is a successful accomplishment of the mission. The British, with their rich naval history, managed to find a balance for all these elements in this military vehicle. Every detail on a warship, from a gun to a sailor's mug, was designed for victory.
When this ship was commissioned in August of 1939, it had a peacetime crew of 761 officers and men. This was not enough to operate all 4 turrets, so when war started, the crew numbers went up to 950. They lived down here in what looked like a crowded accommodations, but this was a standard format throughout the whole of the Royal Navy, hammocks being hung up where they are above the tables. This was a tradition that goes back about 300 years, that they ate under where they slept. Obviously the sailors needed feeding, and this galley supplied over 2,000 meals a day. It's part of the original ship and would provide meals for the sailors: fish, chips, peas, macaroni cheese, jam roly-poly. All these things would be cooked. They sometimes, during World War II, if a mine went off, would cause a loud explosion underwater, which would stun the fish, and they would float to the surface. If they could, they would gather the fish up so that they would have fresh fish instead of the ones from the deep freezers.
Since Nelson's times, the food ration in the British Royal Navy had not been diverse. The food was substantial, but if it remained unchanged for weeks, even a small bar of chocolate or a jar of jam would be precious for any sailor. However, the real emporium of wonders on Belfast was a ship kiosk, where the sailors could purchase delicacies and everyday items.
We are in the NAFI canteen. The NAFI is an organisation that was invented or developed in 1921 by a team of volunteers who wanted to help the Navy, the Army and the Air Force get things that they couldn't get on ship normally. So things like beers, sweets, chocolates, medal ribbons, rulers, pencils, postcards, anything that they weren't issued with. And as a consequence, it developed into an institution and became known by all the members of the British Armed Forces as the NAFI, the Navy Army Air Force Institute, which over the years of service on the ship become a great boost to the morale of the sailors.
There is a saying that perfectly describes military life: an army marches on its stomach. This rule was implicitly adhered to in the Royal Navy as well.
At action stations, if they knew they were going to have a fight, some of the captains would have the cooks prepare sandwiches so that they could eat where they were at their action stations, whether it was by their guns or in the doctor's surgery. The sick bay we have here is from the late 1950s, early 1960s, and would have been similar to the one in 1930s during World War II. The conditions on the ship in the hospitals would be as modern as they could make it, and the sailors would be better off in here normally than they would be in their own hammocks. In times of war, Other parts of the ship, especially the officers' mess, would be cleared of all the furniture, and temporary operating tables like the one you can see behind me would have been established around the ship.
Luckily, casualties among Belfast's crew were minimal during the war, even after a bottom mine exploded next to her, which could easily sink the ship with all her crew members. Only 21 people were injured, and only one of them died later in hospital. After repairs and modernisation, Belfast became the flagship of the 10th Cruiser Squadron based at Scapa Flow. The main service areas for the ship were the waters of the Norwegian and Barents Seas.
The two best light cruisers of the British Royal Navy have an interesting history. Belfast comes into commission, hits a mine, and becomes disabled for almost 3 years. Meanwhile, HMS Edinburgh comes into service and fulfills the duties of both cruisers. She escorts convoys, supports Allied ships, and fights against enemy submarines and aircraft. Unfortunately, Edinburgh was sunk with a valuable cargo of gold. However, Belfast returns from the repair docks and takes up the torch. What hadn't been accomplished by Edinburgh was completed by Belfast. They complemented each other. They were like twin sisters, worthy of each other.
When Belfast came into service, she was assigned the most important task in the Royal Navy, which, by the 20th century, had already been performed for 300 years. This task was to defend shipping routes and manage potential threats for transport ships. As a true defender of commerce, Belfast escorted Arctic convoys in the USSR and supported vessels carrying priceless cargo.
I was born in 1940 during the war, yeah. And I always, ever since I was a young person, yeah, I always wanted to join the Navy. And I read stories, and when I was young, I used to read the stories about the heroism of the Russian convoys and other things on ships. But I'm not sure what I was thinking about on the convoys. And about all they could say was, it was rather rough, it was rather cold, and we survived. But they never said much about it, yeah? I always thought, I want to be, I'm going to join the Navy and I'm going to be brave like they are, yeah? So I did.
The rich history of sea battles and high qualification of British sailors were key factors for the great performance of the Royal Navy. The British always acted in a reasonable way, following thorough and elaborate plans. The opportunity to display their courage and bravery was a great reward for British sailors.
The main task in the Army or Navy is fulfilling your mission. No matter how many enemies you destroy, sink, or knock out, you must fulfill your mission. If German ships go peacefully by, nobody will attack them. But if they threaten the convoy, the British, despite the tremendous superiority of the Germans, attacked their heavy warships. They did what they had to. The Germans were astonished and forced to retreat. And the British didn't think themselves heroes. They were just doing their duty. A classic example of warring parties carrying out a mission was a sea battle that took place at North Cape in December 1943. The German battleship Scharnhorst, accompanied by 5 destroyers, was tasked with destroying a convoy. That was her mission. The convoy support ships, including cruiser Belfast, were assigned a mission to defend the convoy at any cost. The British attacked the enemy. They didn't pause. They didn't think about how to show their courage or perform heroic acts. They fulfilled their duty. Of course, they knew that the German heavy ship would destroy them, but they had a mission: defend the convoy. And they attacked the enemy and fought.
For 8 hours, Belfast and 2 other cruisers were chasing and attacking Scharnhorst, which was superior in terms of armament and armor, until the main sea fleet, with HMS Duke of York, came to their aid. The battle at North Cape and the war for the entire Atlantic Ocean was won by the British. The confrontation between Great Britain and Germany during World War II was severe. However, the United Kingdom was the victor, despite the high price they had to pay. The memories of those sailors who endured the ordeal of the northern convoys are still honoured on Belfast today.
I gave it a reprieve and made it, brought it as a flagship for Home Fleet.
By the early 1970s, Belfast was the only remaining British cruiser that participated in World War II. She was going to be sent to the shipbreaking yard, like her fellow ships. However, thanks to the efforts of British veterans and those who were concerned about naval history, cruiser Belfast was saved and left as a memorial to the courage and bravery of British sailors. Today, she holds pride of place at Tower Bridge, in the heart of London.
And I've had a very enjoyable life, and I still am. I'm still serving this ship, as Secretary of the Association. And I don't think anybody can ask more than being able to do and achieve what a person wants to do. And that's what I'm still doing.
Muito bom, mais outro artigo muito bom, muito bem feito.
Destroyers are the fastest, most maneuverable, and stealthiest ship type in the game. Despite the fact that they don't have powerful guns or strong armor, they can unleash a truly unpleasant surprise upon their enemies by ambushing them and attacking with powerful torpedoes. In the next episode, we're going to tell you about the last and only remaining travel-class destroyer, Haida.
Hamilton, Ontario is about 45 minutes southwest of Toronto. Here can be found HMCS Haida. She's the last of the tribal class destroyers and is Canada's naval legend.
If you had asked a Canadian at the beginning of the 20th century to tell you about their country's navy, which has more than 240,000 kilometers of coastline, their answer would probably be no longer than this sentence. At that time, Canada was a dominion of the British Empire, and the defense of its sea borders was entirely under the authority of Whitehall.
The Canadian Navy didn't exist until 1910. Okay, and then the First World War, we had two old retired cruisers from the Royal Navy, but they did nothing. They just served as depot ships, basically. And a lot of it was, did we even have to have a Navy in the first place? And there was a big problem with the whole defense actually in the 30s. Do we even need it? And there wasn't really a goal, wasn't a need seen for the Canadian Navy.
In the first half of the 1930s, Japan, Italy, France and Germany were reinforcing their navies with brand new destroyers, carrying powerful artillery and torpedo armament. Of course, Great Britain didn't want to be an outsider in this race. In 1935, British engineers developed a destroyer that was able to successfully oppose the most powerful ships of this type at that time, the Japanese Fubuki-class destroyers. It became known as the Tribal class. As soon as the Royal Navy received 16 tribals, British dominions expressed their desire to obtain the newest destroyers as quickly as possible, because the drums of the European war were already heard across the oceans. Canada mobilized.
One-tenth of Canada in 1939 had a population of 12 million. Okay? We had 1 million men and women in uniform. All of those people were volunteers. All the Canadian combatants were volunteers. So when you see those war graves in Normandy and in Holland, or whatever, or in Italy, those people were all volunteers.
During the war, as the Canadian Navy grew, mostly thanks to the addition of escort corvettes and frigates, its area of responsibility also increased, and in the end included the entire North Atlantic. Each new ship, even a modest minesweeper, contributed to the combat capability of the Allies at sea. Destroyer Hyder was laid down at the end of September of 1941 at a British Vickers Armstrong shipyard. The ship was commissioned 2 years later and was assigned to the Metropolitan Fleet. Specifications of Destroyer Hyder: length, almost 115 meters. Beam, more than 11 meters. Draft, 3.96 meters. Total displacement, 2,519 tons. Armament: primary armament, 6 Mark 12 guns installed in 3 twin turrets, caliber 120mm. Mark 16 dual-purpose guns in a twin mount, caliber 102mm. Anti-aircraft artillery, a Vickers Mark 7 quadruple anti-aircraft machine gun, pom-pom, caliber 40mm. 6 twin Oerlikon autocannons, caliber 20mm. Mine and torpedo armament, a quadruple torpedo launcher, caliber 533mm, 2 Mark IV mortars and an aft depth charge release gear. The ship carried 30 mines in reserve. Power plant, 3 Admiralty-type boilers and 2 Parsons geared steam turbines. Power, 44,000 horsepower. Maximum speed, 36 knots. Cruising range, 5,700 miles at 15 knots.
Haida's primary punch came from 3 twin 4.7-inch mounts. This was very heavy firepower for a destroyer of the era. They did come with a couple of advantages, as a few German destroyers discovered, but they also came with one significant disadvantage. The elevation was limited to only about 40 degrees on these mounts. In order to fix this, what they did was they replaced the 4.7s with twin 4-inch dual-purpose mounts, such as the ones behind me now. These could elevate up to 85 degrees and thus engage aircraft as well as surface targets out to about 14.5 kilometers.
From the very beginning, designers of the Tribal project put emphasis on reinforced artillery armament and planned to install 5 120mm twin turrets, 3 on the bow and 2 on the aft. The ship was conceived as a destroyer leader, and it was intended to partially complete the objectives of a light cruiser. Supporting squadrons of Allied destroyers, defending the main forces of the fleet against enemy destroyer attacks, and carrying out long-range reconnaissance and patrols.
One of the controversial design decisions when they were creating the Tribals was that they decided to reduce the torpedo complement in favor of the gun batteries. As a result, the Tribals were only equipped with a single quad mount for the 21-inch torpedoes, and these would go about 5 miles at 45 knots. The theory was that ordinarily the torpedo would be the main armament of a destroyer to sink ships, but it turns out in practice, Haida's kills were all done with gunfire. The torpedoes were aimed from the bridge wings. What would happen is once the trigger was pulled up there, a signal was sent to fire this shell casing, which has propellant. The gases would then expand within the reservoir here, push out the torpedo over the side of the ship. Of course, the stanchions will go down and then off towards the target. And each torpedo tube is labeled with a letter. And what you do is you always fire the aft torpedo first, because as the destroyer is moving, you want to make sure that they don't hit each other. Of course, having the ships is all very well, but they're not going to do very much without having the personnel to man them. Canada started off the war as basically a homeland defense force. She had 6 destroyers, a number of smaller vessels, and a navy of about 1,700 personnel. They had great possibilities for promotion, though, because by the end of the war, Canada's navy had expanded to over 110,000 personnel and had the 3rd largest amount of surface vessels in the world.
Destroyer Haida began her combat career by escorting Russian Arctic convoys. At the end of December 1943, the German battlecruiser Scharnhorst tried to attack convoy JW-55B, which was escorted by Haida among others. However, the destroyer did not have a chance to participate in the destruction of the German raider. It was handled by her more heavyweight allies from the Metropolitan Fleet.
At the start of the Second World War, Canadian Navy came under the control of the Royal Navy. And they were controlled, operated basically controlled by the Royal Navy. It wasn't until later on, again, as the Canadian Navy grew, that we were looking for our own, we again became our own entity unto ourselves, okay? Just A, because of size, and B, because of where we were. But by and large, yes, the Canadian Navy was very much treated as colonials and second-class citizens, except for, again, this ship and the Tribals. These were the top of the form, and they bested the Brits at doing the same thing.
In January 1944, Haida was assigned to the 10th Destroyer Flotilla, which monitored the western part of the English Channel. On April 26th, during a patrol, her squadron discovered 3 German destroyers. Haida and her sister ship, Athabaskan, engaged the German T-29, which ended in the destruction of the latter.
1.5 months later, roughly in the same area, a battle took place in which Haida made herself famous and brought glory to the entire Royal Canadian Navy.
The night of the 9th of June 1944 saw Haida partake in a rather spirited and very chaotic fight against the 8th Destroyer Flotilla of the German Navy. The 8th was a small force consisting of 3 destroyers, 2 Narviks, a captured Dutch ship, and a torpedo boat, whilst the 10th Destroyer Flotilla, of which Haida was a part, consisted of 2 4-ship divisions. The 19th was mainly inexperienced vessels, and the 20th was, shall we say, the 18th. They had been told to intercept a German force which was known to be approaching the western approaches of the English Channel. And sure enough, contact was made at about 7 miles.
The German destroyers spotted the Allied ships first when they became highlighted by the moonlight. The Germans launched 12 torpedoes, but their adversaries managed to dodge them. An artillery battle broke out, and the Allies had total fire superiority. Haida and Huron concentrated fire on Z-24 and quickly achieved success. Almost the entire above-water part of the ship was destroyed and set ablaze. The enemy attempted to flee under the cover of a smokescreen. The flagship Z-32 continued fighting against Tartar and Ashanti on her own and took 3 hits. Z-32 turned right to put some distance between her and the Allies. Ashanti rushed after her. At this moment, the damaged ZH-1 became visible in the dissipating smoke. Her artillery quickly opened fire on Tartar, but Ashanti arrived in time and torpedoed the motionless ship. The torpedo explosion tore the ZH-1's bow away. Ashanti kept firing on the German destroyer. At 2:40, ZH-1 exploded and sank. Later that night, Canadian destroyers were sweeping the area and stumbled across the heavily damaged Z-32. Fleeing from them, Z-32 was driven ashore on the Ile de Batz, where in the morning she was finished off by British Beaufighter aircraft. The Allies managed to destroy 2 German destroyers and damage 2 more. After the successful battle on June the 9th, 1944, Haida and her allies continued to complete missions aimed at removing enemy ships from coastal waters.
During the fighting in the English Channel, Haida had a couple of advantages called radar. In fact, she had 3 of them. She had firstly a gunnery radar. This was accurate enough to spot fall of shot, both outbound and inbound, much to the consternation of the operators. She had warning combined, which is a fairly reliable radar, although it was well known to the Germans, and so the British and Canadians didn't like to use it unless contact was joined. And finally, she had warning surface, which was a pretty reliable radar which would detect a destroyer-sized target at about 9 miles. All of these would prove vital in the night fighting in the English Channel.
Despite the fact that the German surface fleet was virtually non-existent by the end of June 1944, the naval war went on. The more success the Allies achieved in the land operations, the more desperately and fiercely German submarines opposed them at sea.
The time-honored method of dealing with an enemy submarine will be the depth charge, usually mounted on rails at the stern of the ship or maybe fired off the side with K-guns. The problem was that in order to hit your target, you had to go directly over it, which meant A, that you lost contact, and B, you actually had to be accurate enough to do it. The end replacement of it, however, was the squid mortar. Haida received her squids in the 1950s update. They replaced both the depth charge rails and the aft gun. Now, the advantage of squid was it was adjustable in range. No longer did you have to ride over your target in order to sink it. And they were fired automatically by means of a simple electrical connection attached to the sonar system inside the ship. Haida has a U-boat kill to her credit, U-971 in 1944, as Haida was protecting the western approaches to the English Channel during the invasion of France. Overall, the Royal Canadian Navy developed a reputation for ASW excellence. They sank about 30 U-boats, and in the post-war period, they became the de facto ASW force for NATO.
During World War II, the number of people in the Canadian Navy grew almost 70 times. And in all those years, Canadian sailors developed their own understanding of naval service, which was slightly different from the traditions of the British Royal Navy.
An interesting event in Canadian naval history happened in 1949 with what are known as the Canadian Mutinies. The word is a little bit strong for what happened, not least because the captain of Athabaskan accidentally on purpose left his cover on top of the written list of demands from the junior sailors, so he never officially saw anything. This happened on a couple of ships about the same time, not Haida, it should be noted, and what it really was more of a sit-down protest pending an airing of grievances. And this came down to something of a cultural difference between North Americans and people from England. Where North American people, we tend to be a little bit more independent, shall we say. We like to know why we're doing, we like to have a little bit more consideration, shall we say, from up above, instead of simply being told you're going to do this when, like it or lump it. The officers were more steeped in the tradition of the Royal Navy, the British Navy, which perhaps was a little bit more autocratic. The end result of this, it all worked out fairly well, is that the Canadian Navy developed new policies which took greater concern of the requirements, shall we say, of the junior enlisted sailors.
Some people in the Canadian government believed that this incident was inspired by communist ideas, but this opinion was completely unjustified. Moreover, the destroyer was soon sent to Southeast Asia to fight against the Red Menace.
Again, the ship was converted to the way it is now. The armament was all changed, upgraded in 1951. And this is the way the ship was when it went to Korea in 1952. And that's where Haida became famous when it joined what they called the Train Busters Club. And this was a method of trying to destroy North Korean trains that ran along the coast at night. And it ran at night, figuring they couldn't be seen. So they ran it became a contest invented by the U.S. Navy to see if they could destroy these trains, Train Buster. In the history of the Train Busters Club, there were 25 trains destroyed. Haida is second in train busting with 2.5. Haida's record has always been superb gunnery actions. In fact, the current Canadian Navy trophy for gunnery expertise is named after Haida. It's the Haida Trophy for gunnery excellence.
During her second tour of duty in the Yellow Sea in 1954, Haida patrolled Korean shores, supervising the implementation of the ceasefire treaty supported by the United Nations. This was the first example of what we call today a peacekeeping mission, 10 years before this notion was introduced and became widely used. Haida reprised this role during the Suez Crisis of 1956.
The ship retired in October 1963, because again, the life of a warship is basically 20 years. And again, at that time, the Canadian Navy was expanding. They were building completely different types of ships. And again, the men that were needed on the tribals were needed to man other ships. So the tribals were scrapped. And it was that time that an ex-naval person, Neil Bruce, decided that it'd be try to preserve the ship as Canada's greatest ship and just preserve it as tribal. And they were successful in that. An organization was formed, Haida Incorporated, and they acquired the ship from Crown Assets in 1964. They bought it for a huge sum at that time, $20,000. And it existed there as a museum, National Historic Site.
If you asked a Canadian today to tell you about their country's Navy, which has more than 240,000 kilometers of coastline, then you would definitely hear a long story full of brilliant victories and heroic names. Especially Haida, a destroyer of the Royal Canadian Navy.
While helming carriers, players can act as squadron commanders and pilot several types of aircraft: attack aircraft, bombers, and torpedo bombers. The heroes of the next episode are the Pacific champions, heavy Essex-class aircraft carriers, representatives of the most numerous carrier series in history. Let's watch.
They were designed to be the best. They met enemies face to face, endured tragedies and enjoyed victories. They went down in history due to the bravery of their crews. They are the ships that deserve to be called naval legends. In this episode, the aviation of Essex-class aircraft carriers, terror of the Pacific Ocean. The outcome of battles in the Pacific Ocean during World War II didn't depend on the primary armament of mighty battleships anymore. Often, opposing ships didn't make a single artillery salvo and couldn't even see one another through binoculars. Pearl Harbor, the bombing of Tokyo, the clash of aircraft carriers in the Coral Sea, the main characters in these operations were the carrier aviation. In the first year of the war, the Japanese army achieved a number of significant victories and captured almost all of Southeast Asia, while the Imperial fleet was dominating in the Pacific Ocean.
Imagine a small island country controls a territory 17 times bigger than its own and with a population 5 times greater. However, it's one thing to conquer, it's another thing to retain it. In the summer of 1942, the Japanese suffered a crushing defeat in the Battle of Midway. It's after this victory that the Americans started active offensive actions. Japan manufactured 18 aircraft carriers over the course of the war, not counting those commissioned before the war. Meanwhile, the U.S. economy could accommodate the construction of 150 aircraft carriers. Essex-class aircraft carriers became the main striking force of the U.S. Navy and were pivotal in the war in the Pacific.
The air group of Essex-class ships consisted of 4 squadrons. Reconnaissance, bomber, and torpedo bomber squadrons had 18 aircraft each. The fighter squadron was reinforced and had 36 aircraft instead of 18. It was a timely decision. These were the fighters who gradually started to win in the Pacific skies. In the early years of the war, the primary aircraft of the U.S. carrier aviation were the Dauntless dive bombers and the Wildcat fighter planes. They showed good performance, but became obsolete by the beginning of 1943 and needed to be replaced. Modern Avenger torpedo bombers were the first to appear on the flight decks and in the hangars of Essex-class carriers. Grumman TBF/TBM Avenger torpedo bomber. Maximum takeoff weight 8,286 kilograms. Engine power 1,900 brake horsepower. Maximum speed 444 kilometers per hour. Armament 2 times M2 machine guns, caliber 12.7 millimeters. 1 times M2 machine gun in the upper turret, caliber 12.7 millimeters. 1 times M1919 machine gun in the lower turret, caliber 7.62 millimeters. A torpedo or bomb load up to 908 kilograms, including 8 times 127mm HVAR rockets.
It was a very effective airplane and a good demonstration of one of the advantages the U.S. Navy had over our adversary, the Japanese, in that Second World War. Not only could we produce more aircraft carriers, but we could produce more aircraft. And with the design of the folding wings, as you see on the TBM Avenger, we were able to carry more airplanes on each ship because of that. It provided extra space for us to carry more aircraft, and that way we could outnumber our adversaries in combat. I never got to fly one. I always thought it was one of the most beautiful airplanes the Navy ever built. And as a youngster, I used to make models of all the airplanes that they had, and this is one of the prominent models that I have.
Avengers took their rightful place on aircraft carriers, while the obsolete Dauntless and Wildcat planes were replaced by the Helldiver dive bombers and the Hellcat fighter planes. Grumman F-6F Hellcat fighter plane. Maximum takeoff weight, 6,990 kilograms. Engine power, 2,250 brake horsepower. Maximum speed, 611 kilometers per hour. Armament, 6 times M2 machine guns. Caliber, 12.7 millimeters. 2 times 227 kilograms bombs. And 6 times 127 millimeters HVAR rockets.
The Hellcat was the most mass-produced fighter plane of the U.S. naval aviation during World War II. U.S. engineers installed a more powerful engine than the one found on the previous model, the Wildcat, thus improving the flight characteristics. The new fighter had greater maneuverability, speed, as well as fuel and ammunition capacity.
In the last 2 years of the war, Hellcats shot down more than 5,000 Japanese aircraft, contributing to 2/3 of all victories of the U.S. carrier aviation in dogfights. The F-6F has one of the best ratios of victories to losses in the Pacific, 19-1. That means that for every Hellcat lost, 19 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. The Helldiver was the most ambiguous plane of the Essex's carrier aviation. Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver Scout Bomber. Maximum takeoff weight, 7,553 kilograms. Engine power, 1,900 brake horsepower. Maximum speed, 474 kilometers per hour. Armament, 2 times Mark II cannons, caliber 20 millimeters. Twin-mount M19-19 machine gun in the upper turret, caliber 7.62 millimeters. Total bomb load up to 908 kilograms, including 8 times 127 millimeter HVAR rockets. This aircraft wasn't easy to handle. The landing gear legs of these machines would literally collapse the moment they touched the flight deck, while braking barriers failed to catch them.
When a Helldiver was going to land, all personnel were removed from the deck. The explanation is quite simple. This aircraft had quite poor flight characteristics, especially when landing on a moving deck. In addition, it would often lose its ammunition, which didn't add to its reliability. That's why, when the aircraft initially began service, the U.S. sailors nicknamed it the Big-Tailed Beast.
However, Helldivers had some noteworthy advantages. They were fast for a bomber and were able to sustain serious damage. The shortcomings were fixed in the later versions, but the pilots kept their prejudice against Helldivers until the end of the war. The F-4U Corsair fighter bomber was the last to appear on Essex-class aircraft carriers. Vought F-4U Corsair fighter bomber. Maximum takeoff weight, 6,654 kilograms. Engine power, 2,100 brake horsepower. Maximum speed, 721 kilometers per hour. Armament, 6 times M2 machine guns. Caliber, 12.7 millimeters. 2 times 227 kilograms. Bombs. And 8 times 127 millimeters HVAR rockets. The enemy nicknamed it Whistling Death. When the aircraft was diving, it produced a sound that scared Japanese soldiers to death. Thanks to excellent speed characteristics, Corsairs took the initiative in battle and became one of the best combat aircraft of World War II, and the greatest threat to the Japanese army and fleet.
The F-4U Corsair played a key role in World War II as a fighter aircraft, and its gull-wing design that everyone is so familiar with was necessary so that it could operate both on carriers and be effective in the air. In fact, it became a cornerstone of air-to-air combat in World War II, and then again in the Korean War. That was its primary era of effectiveness. It was soon replaced by other aircraft into the 1950s, but when it came to World War II and Korea, the Corsair was a main aircraft in the air-to-air combat.
Every flight operation had difficulties for US pilots of the carrier aviation. On top of combat against strong adversaries, pilots had to show their skill during takeoff and landing. Aircraft could be sent on missions in bad weather or at night.
Nighttime was kind of a nightmare. It was, of course, dark. We only had red lights operating on the flight deck so that our eyes didn't dilate. And on this ship, it required movement of the aircraft, which was rather unusual. As our operations day would begin, they would take half the air group, put them on the flight deck at the rear, fill them all with gasoline, bombs and rockets and ammunition, and then they would start them up and taxi forward, and then they would launch them. As soon as they were launched, they would bring up the other half of the air group, position them at the back, fill them with gasoline, bombs, rockets, and ammunition, then start their engines, have them taxi forward, and then launch. And usually just as the last one was launching, the original group that went was coming back to land on board. After they landed then, it was necessary to taxi forward and park the airplanes on the side of the flight deck in a parallel position. And then after everybody had recovered from the launch, then all of those airplanes were moved to the rear using tractors. And then they were refueled, got new bombs and rockets and so forth. This went on for 12 hours a day, and you can imagine what a circus this became on the flight deck. It was very, very dangerous. People who worked here were very young men, and they did a very dangerous job. And they did a very good job of it, too.
Air groups of Essex-class carriers had their baptism of fire during the raid on Marcus Island on August the 31st, 1943. During that time, the US military strategy consisted in a systematic removal of the Japanese from the conquered territories. The task force's aircraft were destroying Japanese aviation at airfields, demolishing defensive fortifications on islands, and attacking the enemy fleet when it tried to interfere with the troops landing. As a result of these local operations, the Japanese army was diminishing by the minute. In the summer of 1944, during 2 days of battle in the Philippine Sea, US pilots of aircraft carriers from Task Force 58 destroyed more than 90% of all Japanese carrier aviation. By the spring of 1945, the US fleet was reinforced with another 5 new Essex-class ships. The Japanese had nothing that could oppose them. The US carrier aviation sank 5 battleships, including both super battleships, first Musashi and then Yamato. They also sank 11 aircraft carriers, 14 cruisers, and many other enemy ships. That's when the Japanese command turned to their last resort, to change the situation in the sky over the Pacific Ocean. The Spirit Wind became the main enemy of the US fleet.
Kamikaze is translated from the Japanese as the spirit wind, meaning the wind that must crush the enemies of Japan. Battles in the Philippine Sea made it obvious that the training of Japanese pilots is much worse than that of their US counterparts. Apart from that, the United States were producing far more aircraft than Japan. Under these circumstances, the Japanese command decided to bring back the spirit wind tactics, which could help them prevail over the United States. To this end, they recruited conscripts that could barely fly an aircraft. They had a single mission: take off in a plane stuffed with explosives and fly it into an enemy ship. However, not only inexperienced pilots participated in such attacks. Rear Admiral Arima aimed his plane at the U.S. aircraft carrier Franklin. Essex-class heavy aircraft carriers remained their main targets.
Kamikazes could act individually, in pairs, or even in large squadrons. During the last year of the Pacific War, they succeeded in damaging 8 Essex-class ships. However, it didn't have a significant influence on the balance of force. Not a single aircraft carrier was sunk. Even the seriously damaged USS Franklin CV-13 and USS Bunker Hill CV-17 were able to get to the Pearl Harbor base without assistance.
No spirit wind could save Japan from a defeat in World War II. In July and August of 1945, the U.S. carrier aviation delivered mass airstrikes on the Japanese territory. The last ships of the once mighty Imperial Japanese Navy were destroyed at the Kure Naval Base.
US historians call Essex-class aircraft carriers Pacific champions and masters of the Pacific Ocean. Pilots of the US carrier aviation shot down more than 9,000 enemy aircraft in dogfights, and almost half of them are attributed to planes launched from Essex-class ships. The powerful US economy crushed and broke the aggressive samurai spirit by the end of the war, and the Essex-class ships' air groups made a very important contribution to the victory of the United States in the Pacific Ocean.
Thank you all for watching. To activate a bonus code, log into the game's website. See you for the next episode on September 13th. The most important part, come visit our celebratory stream dedicated to the 5th anniversary of...
Como viram, tem aqui alguns códigos no fim. Olha quando ela começa a falar. Este, por exemplo, o time que tem a seguir. Eu vou guardar aqui. Muito bom este vídeo, bastante comprido, 1h20, excelente mesmo. Continuando, então tem aqui o Excel para 0.9.9, do que aí vem, está em teste, que acho que está aqui já no servidor. Primeira ronda já começou no dia 10 e vai até dia 15, primeira ronda. Vamos ver o que é que eles vão trazer. Eu agora ultimamente não tenho entrado no servidor de teste, só quando foi a situação dos submarinos, quando foi a situação dos porta-aviões, é que vou ver, porque acho que não adianta muito, porque eles alteram, são várias opções, não vale a pena. Mas quem quiser experimentar já sabe, é no text. Depois, o WarThunder. O WarThunder teve um update. Ou ainda vão fazer o update agora que até já estou confuso. Vamos ver aqui o vídeo também. O Ranger Fire.
Hi friends, the heat of summer has just ended, and the hot new update, Raining Fire, comes to WarThunder. 3-dimensional tank projectiles, naval mines, an aircraft weapon selector, and of course, new vehicles from different nations. All of this and more is waiting for you in the game, but everything in its time. Not too long ago, the Italian naval tree became available to all players, and with the release of this update, it gets crowned with the heavy cruiser Zara. The 180-meter monster is armed with 8 203mm main guns, whilst its thicker armor makes it one of the most protected ships in the game. For fans of Soviet tank building tradition, there's a long-awaited novelty in the form of the T-72B3 main battle tank. The vehicle is equipped with a new sight with thermal imaging and a more powerful engine. But the main change is, of course, the armor, the old Kontakt 1. Reactive armor at the front of the tank has been replaced by the Kontakt 5, which is already familiar to players from the T-80U tank. Additionally, the sides of the vehicle are covered by a completely new type of reactive armor for WarThunder. This goes by the name of Relikt. The British and French Air Force get a new Rank 6 jet aircraft, the Jaguar GR-1 and the Jaguar A. These fighter bombers will be perfect for both achieving air domination and fighting enemy ground forces. They've got powerful 30mm cannons and an impressive arsenal of secondary weaponry, bombs of various calibers, unguided rockets, and of course, guided air-to-air missiles. The Sidewinder AIM-9G and the Matra R550 Magic 1. Fans of the French tanks with oscillating turrets will surely appreciate the Char Sommois SM. Historically, the military preferred the AMX-50 during the tests, so the Sommois never went into production. But in WarThunder, players can try this tank in battle. The machine will please fans with a powerful 100mm cannon equipped with an 8-round autoloader and some great armor as well. The Chinese aviation tree has been reinforced with the multi-purpose Q-5 fighter bomber jet, which is a deep upgrade of the Soviet MiG-19. Two 23mm cannons with 240 rounds of ammunition and powerful rockets and bombs will make a lot of noise in mixed battle. The formidable Japanese tank destroyer, the Chi-Ha long gun, is a sight to behold for all you heavy caliber gun admirers out there. Based on the medium Chi-Ha tank, the machine is equipped with a powerful 120mm naval gun, the same cannon used on the Ka-Ko heavy cruiser. Elevation angles from -10 to +15 degrees and a reload rate of 10 seconds with an ace crew make excellent value for such a caliber. Of course, we can't help but mention a new type of weapon. The update Raining Fire brings deadly naval mines into the game. By the way, they aren't exclusive to surface vessels. You can also use them in combat, even in an aircraft. Meanwhile, tank rounds have gained some volume. Large caliber armor-piercing projectiles can no longer squeeze into narrow gaps between turrets and hulls. This means that the damage model and the interaction between the projectile and the armor will become even more realistic. We're also continuing to expand the Swedish tank tree. The STRV-104 is the most advanced modification of the Scandinavian Centurions. The vehicle has received a set of reactive armor to protect the tank from high explosive ammunition, and a new engine and transmission improve its mobility, which allows the tank to increase its maximum speed up to 48 kilometers per hour. We also can't forget the new modifications of the legendary P-47 Thunderbolt, the Razorback. The new vehicles are distinguished by the cockpit canopy gradually transforming into the fuselage spine fairing. In all other cases, they're the same formidable Thunderbolts with incredibly powerful engines and a battery of 8 Brownings. Detection and protection equipment is evolving as well. Tanks and helicopters can now get laser warning receivers that will alert the crew in advance with both a sound and a text alert, whilst an indicator on the screen will alert you to the direction of the threat. The last group of novelties will surely make our pilots happy. First of all, following the tankers, our favorite protection analysis is now available to them as well. Secondly, we've added favorite sets of secondary weapons, which will make it easier to select them before a battle. And finally, the new weapon selector allows you to forget about assigning separate keys for each type of ammunition. Now, all you have to do is select the ones you want in the menu and press one universal launch button. But of course, there's more. As always, you will find the full list of changes on our official website. Try out the novelties in combat. Be sure to share your impressions in the comments. Don't forget, please leave a like and stay tuned for more content. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to watch in-depth videos about new tech. See you soon, guys.
O WarThunder tem coisas muito mais à frente do que o mesmo coisa do Wargame. O caso das minas, por exemplo, nos barcos é algo que já devia estar no Warships, mas enfim. E pronto, pessoal, penso que por hoje ficamos aqui, foi até mais comprido do que o normal. Estamos a 1h51 de live, o que normalmente nas conversas até não costuma demorar tanto, mas pronto, foi aquele vídeo de 1h e tal. Espero que tenham gostado e compareçam, se puderem seguir aqui o canal já sabem. Tem então os vídeos aqui na lista de reprodução interessantes para seguir. Bom. Prontos, por hoje é tudo. Continuação de um bom domingo, uma boa semana, e não se esqueçam que esta semana que vai entrar vamos ter o lançamento dos testes das novas gráficas da Nvidia. Estejam atentos. Bom, muito obrigado